dive straight in. Thank you. I have to click on something now.
Yeah, got it.
And what I decided to do was, rather than try and tell you everything in great detail very fast, I'll try and give you a couple of glimpses of what happened with connected curriculum at UCL. And I dug out these slides that were shown to us at the very beginning, so about 2014, 2015, I'm vague now. By the way, we've been renamed. We're not Centre for the Advancement of Learning and Teaching anymore. We're now ARENA, A-R-E-N-A, and I think we're about to be renamed again. So just look for connected curriculum if you want to know more. We'll give you these slides. There's lots of slides here, and I say this was the introduction moment. And so I've added this graphic, which was created later, which has been mutilated by PowerPoint. I apologise for that. But it shows what we call the 7 petals, the 7 key aspects of what it was. And right at the centre is students learning through doing research and inquiry, which we call research-based education, as opposed to research-led education and other ways of describing it. This means that the students are doing some kind of real inquiry themselves, which preferably it has some originality to it. Now, I did my undergraduate in the late 80s, beginning of the 90s, and the idea of students actually doing genuine research and finding out new things it seemed impossible. So this was quite a jump for me. But equally important to connected curriculum was the way this cascaded throughout the whole curriculum. So let's talk about it. We'll assume here an English 3-year undergraduate degree, but it could be applied to 4-year degrees or slightly bigger degrees. It's very difficult to do in a 1-year master's, which is the norm in England, particularly in the UK. So I just really want to dance through some of the aspects that follow on. It's not just research-based education. There are other initiatives in there too. One at the top one is students connecting with researchers and the institution's research. And I really like this one. There was a student strike 10 years ago or so about fees. And talking to students about that, they didn't know that the university wasn't just for teaching. I mean, we knew, but they just didn't understand that the university existed for more than teaching. And so what this project, for instance, one thing that came out of this was a project called Meet the Researcher, where simply students were invited to create an appointment with a researcher in their department and talk to them about the research. Very unstructured, 1-hour meeting with coffee. And this went extraordinarily well, much better than we thought. And it helped the students understand that these people teaching them, for the most part, were active researchers and gave the researchers a chance to talk about what was interesting them. Now that sounds like an interesting 1 hour, but the implications were that the students were joining a community of people who do research. So there's no longer such a sharp divide here between the staff who do research and the students. So we're all doing various level-appropriate ways of thinking about inquiry and research. So I hope that makes sense. I'm going to rely on YouTube to say, and if I'm talking too fast, I can't see the audience faces here. I'm looking at a camera, I feel like I'm talking to a Dalek. Okay, so to follow on from that, now the original vision is, I'm going to try and whiz through the vision, not the reality necessarily as it came about. The vision is that there's research activity built into the whole program, and in short, that means you have a project that carries on through the whole degree. You begin thinking about it at the beginning, you carry work into the 2nd year, you carry work into the 3rd year where you complete it in possibly the 4th year. That's very difficult in the UK system, which is heavily modularised. Everything is fenced off. You do this course, you get the credits, that's it, you do the next one. And this actually proved extremely difficult to do within the credit-bearing degree. Some people tried doing it slightly outside, which creates problems because we can't then insist that students do it, it's optional. Take-up is very variable and so on. So in practice, that was very difficult, but it was at the heart of it, the idea that they could pick a project and work out what they needed to learn in order to do it. An aspect that did work well was students making connections across subjects and out to the world. Essentially, this took the form of placements, working with industry, working with local communities was also really important. So particularly work with being more inclusive and acknowledging the people's backgrounds. And the situation, this got much more interesting under lockdown. What resources do people have in their communities and around them? And I'm going to blend that with number 4. The idea was to get them out of university into other contexts where knowledge and understanding was used in a different way to help ground its relevance, throw out what was more interesting to people outside the university and bring it back to the university. My favourite one is the next one, and PowerPoint cut the number off, but it's number 5. So we're now at 8 o'clock on the clock here. Students learn to produce outputs directed at an audience. Now, this had, in some areas, a massive effect. Instead of having essays, which are read by 1 or 2 people, marked and then thrown away, or projects or reports or whatever is appropriate to your discipline, the students made something that was made public. A video, a blog, an artifact, even a show or an installation of some kind that was temporary and was a one-off thing. But this was a really profound change. It made teachers think about, who am I writing for? Sorry, it made students think, who am I writing for? Because as any of you know who've done any marking, they're writing to the person that taught them. They're writing an essay as if it's the person who taught them marking, and it might not be. But it also means that they particularly favour a particular way of writing. In the social sciences, and I do appreciate another social sciences audience, there's a game called Name Your Favourite French Philosopher. We sort of name check certain things. I don't know what the equivalent is in geosciences, but I look forward to being told. Things you have to mention in passing, or you don't look like a proper earth scientist. So instead of that, students are going, what would I say to my mother about this? What would I say to my friends from school who are now working in shops or making cars or doing other non-university things? And I think that was the most profound one. If you take one of these away, one idea from this, I would say, look at assessments that are public-facing, shows, artifacts, videos, blogs, podcasts, and so on. And they have the hardware to do this now, right? And we've all got the hang of this stuff in the last couple of years. The next one, I think, is undramatic, connecting with each other and alumni, making real efforts to have students talk across years, mentoring schemes from, these have been around forever. In fact, if I get time, I'll tell you the story of I owe my existence to one of those schemes, because that's how my parents met. So I know these are not new because I'm not new. But a really deliberate effort to implant that into the curriculum, where students could advise one another, and alumni could say, look, this is what happened 2 years later. I realised that the things you think are boring are important, and the things that you think are interesting are less important in practice, and so on. And it helps shape the student mentality towards these things. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to do. How much time do I have left, please?
6 minutes, 7 minutes.
6 minutes, 7 minutes. So look, I'll just tell you about these slides. As I say, these were our introduction. You will be able to have a look at them and think through some of the things I've just said. But unless I see something critical, I think I've picked up the main things, so I can throw open to questions. So I'm going to stop there. Questions, please. Dear, could you watch the? I'm on an unfamiliar computer. Can you tell me who put their hands up first?
Yeah, I will.
And we got the people in the room. Yeah.
So all that looks fantastic. What was the student reaction to this? What did the students actually think of implementation?
Okay, it varied, and what was really important, and I will talk about this a bit more when we talk about ChangeMakers, is it's all about explaining what's expected and what isn't. Students had a very difficult time thinking, well, what am I supposed to do in some situations? I don't know what the standards are that I'm aiming for. I don't know what counts as a solution. I don't know what counts as an answer. The biggest scale examples of this are what the engineering department or faculty set up. Do you know that? Called scenarios, which are a week-long project where they're given very little guidance, and they all love it and hate it. So they're given a situation where one real example was an engineer set up a phone signal that was running from his landline down the public landline system, a beep at intervals. And the task was, you have a week to locate where it's coming from. And they had, that was it. That was all they were told. They had to go and work out how on earth you work out how to track a beeping sound down the landline. And he said someone got within a few houses. So the students then spent a few days going, what on earth am I supposed to do? Then they scrambled it together. And this was really interesting because on the whole, it helped our alumni saying, just do it, just keep going. And years later, second years advising first years, no, this is really rich. You know, I know it's what it's like a really bad ride at a fairground, but actually you learn so much and you get the hang of so many things. So that was the most vivid example, and they're still doing that. The whole first year does those twice a year, 2 different weeks, whole weeks put aside. So the important bit is to shape their expectations and warn them. Yes, it will be disconcerting. Okay, but millions have done it already. Go for it. They do have a PGTA advisor who struggles not to give them the answers. But the trick is not to give them the answers and keep asking them questions. The other thing I would like to throw in that I remember I did want to mention is this was a great educational vision, but it's very difficult to assess whether it worked. You know, how would you tell? Some of the aspects work better than others, but it was very difficult for the accountants to go, yes, this was a success in this department and not in others. But it shook up a lot of the attitudes. So, yeah, expectations were the key bit. Tell them what they should and shouldn't be able to do, and remind them that other people have got through it before, and so on. Support in the chaos.
So just to follow up from that, was there a significant dropout, or did everyone actually pass?
No, occasionally there's always one or two failure rates. Usually, UCL has a very high retention rate. Most of the London universities do. Very, very few students drop out as a rule. So it's really hard to distinguish did someone drop out because of this or because of something else. Usually students drop out because of critical family problems or critical finance problems, or I'm on the wrong course and they leave and go and buy somewhere else. So really difficult to tell. And it's important to stress it wasn't the whole curriculum thrown in one go. It was very much like, in this module we'll try it, in this course we'll bring it in at this point. So the rest of it was shaped by, it was relatively normal. There are lots of case studies of this in a book by Fulton and Carnell. We can send a link. It's a free PDF down there. So there's one book about a vision and another book about case studies of people working with it and so on. PhD students were often the ones who benefited the most because they were helping the students get the hang of these things. And so it forced them to a really quick sense of how it is that you, I'm contradicting myself. Postgraduates, teaching assistants had to learn a lot on the job and enjoyed it. I think that's the quickest way to do it. Do you want to add anything on that? Do you see or hear any?
So this is where they took the people from the different sub-disciplines of engineering, right, and threw them together.
Yes.
Yeah, I heard about it when I was at UCL, and I was looking for it actually probably about the time that I was looking up connected curriculum, and it's very annoying that there isn't that much about this integrated blocks in the engineering program, but it was seriously impressive.
I can give a 30-second version of this. What we're talking about is something called the Integrated Engineering Program at UCL, and that might be how you find more about it. They wanted a whole degree that was built around projects, and the pushback from various departments meant they ended up with an integrated first year. That's the name integrated. And so what they still live in a department, they're still a mechanical engineer or a chemical engineer and so on. But for these scenarios, they're put into teams, even at the very beginning. So you're the mechanical engineer, you're the electrical engineer, I'm the civil engineer. We're all saying, I don't even know my subject yet. But the idea is that you have to work out what your subject is in that situation and start understanding what it is you need to know why. So have a look at the integrated engineering program. Any more? Sorry, I'm watching the screen. I have about 5 different points of focus here. So I would like to quickly say, I think this is now 6 or 7 years in. I think the idea of research-based education is now really embedded in UCL. But I think we have a new provost, which is the vice-chancellor, and a new vice provost education, and I think they are more focused on, what should we call it, streamlining UCL's provision. UCL is a very big and confusing place, and I think they want to sort of tidy up. So it's currently much less educational vision and expansion, and much more, where does this corridor go? Why have you got 4 different degrees with very similar titles? And I personally think it's time we did that. It's a very confusing set of different options or pseudo options, or you think you're getting an integrated engineering program and actually you're getting a couple of weeks with the other engineers, and the rest of the time it's not integrated. So I think it is time that we do that. So we had a big expansion of this, and I think now there's a point like, where have we got to? What do we need to give up on because it's not working? What should we keep? So in a way, we'll know in a couple of years, but it's not as if every degree was transformed. But every department has instances where things rapidly, dramatically changed or improved because someone went, I know, let's try this, let's do this, let's see how it works. Is that?
That's about time.
Time.
You do have a question from Anders.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah,
Well, we're going to switch slides in the background.
yeah, you have one question in the chat, or?
Oh, sorry. Poor sound. How do they relate to research-based MSCs of Norway? I don't know. I think, okay. So to try and pick up this idea of what happens to research-based degrees, you may well be already doing a lot of the things that we were trying to encourage. We were trying to move away from a very strict modularization program, where everything was in boxes. If you've already got a research-based, is that a postgraduate degree perhaps? I think this isn't really actually aimed at that. This is aimed particularly at undergraduate work. We have something called an MRes, which is a 1-year gateway into research, and it certainly, I don't think connected curriculum really got near those or seen as particularly relevant. The heart of this was undergraduate curriculum, where students traditionally sat in lecture theatres for hours and hours a day, writing things down. That was really what we were trying to shake up. Is that not a full answer, but is that useful? Anders, did you hear that okay? We can't hear you. You're muted, I'm afraid.
I have great problems with the sound here, so that's why I write.
Was that a decent enough answer for you?
Yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks. Okay, let me switch up. While Kirsty does the slides, I'm going to quickly talk about ChangeMakers, which is my other main topic. Now, the reason I put them in this order is that although this project was born at the same time and brought in by the same people, it very much was fitted with connected curriculum rather than the other way around. So this made more sense when you were focusing much more on students being busy and doing things than it would have done before. And so these slides have actually been prepared very recently, in contrast to the others which were from the beginning, by the team themselves who do ChangeMakers. And actually, looking at them, I thought this was, in a way, the most interesting bit. It's a timeline of how it's gone. So, quick overview. The idea of ChangeMakers was support students coming forward saying, we would like to change something at UCL. Very simple. In my department, we do this, we would like it to something else. And we didn't define what those topics were. What we provided was funding to make a project work, which was often providing lunches for people. But occasionally it was travel costs involved in getting a speaker in and so on. So these relatively small scale amounts, which were money just to help students get up and running and review things. And that what happened was that moved into what we now have as 3 different schemes. We have that original project-based scheme. I reviewed the most recent set, and 2 of the 3 that I looked at most recently were talking about setting up a student journal in the department of some kind. And one was more realistic than the other. One was actually very well thought through, and the other was a bit hopeful. It didn't understand that actually setting a journal up is an incredibly hard thing to do. And so, for instance, in that case, we suggested that they look at using a blog instead of going all the way to a journal. And so the idea is that we support them in some way to get to where they're going to. But those are the kind of ideas that are coming up now. But we've ended up with 3 strands, and I can't see the board because the videos are in the way, so it doesn't matter too much. We have one group who are called student reviewers of student quality. What are they called now? They've changed the name. It's up here somewhere. We linked our students to student quality reviewers roles. Now, from talking to Christian earlier, I think you've already got that handled. You have students on committees, you have students in curriculum review context and so on. I'm not going to say much about that. We were a bit slow to get to that. We had trouble getting people to attend. And I have a suspicion it's because they're not paid, which I learned this morning, you do pay. So I'm going to go back with that suggestion. But I'm not going to look at that. That's the bureaucratic processes of the university, the ones that make the big decisions about how the department's going to run and so on. There is theoretically representation there, but we've had to encourage that. The more interesting one is the new scheme. There's a student reviewers of teaching, which is essentially a group of students who are interested in working with a teacher to review their teaching. And I was one of the first people who had this because they wanted to do a test run. And these students inspected my Moodle site. Sorry, I think use Canvas here, but virtual learning environment. They went through it and offered some suggestions back to me. And they were interesting suggestions. And in the end, I didn't actually do them because there was a logic to why I'd done it the way I did. And when I explained that, they went, oh, okay, I see what you mean. And so there was a really interesting dialogue. And ultimately, it was a choice that had to be made. But that was really helpful for me to see that. So that kind of thing. And you can, anyone in UCL, any staff member can say, oh, I would like some student reviews of teaching to come in. And it's linked to what we call the peer observation system. We have to do peer observation of some kind once a year if we're teachers. I assume you have something vaguely similar or not. But the idea is that you have to have someone look at your teaching at some point in the year and give you some reality checks. I'm not going to tell you how people get around that and so on. But now UCL has the option of having students come in and do it, and it's working really well. The students enjoy it, and the teachers do apply for it like a fresh perspective. So that's the sort of fairly stable, self-contained one. The new ones are the student fellows, and they're really interesting. It's almost back to the original idea of, well, if you've got an idea, how can we work with you and empower you as a little group to go off and review something? And the idea is that they get support, they get administrative support, they get a little bit of funding. I think they're paid. So somewhere in the slides it says whether they're paid. I think we now pay them a bit more. But it could be any defined project. So it could be looking at, there are some examples, forgive me flicking through. I think they're before this. Right, okay, so on the right-hand side of the screen, student fellows, they work on central projects that are institutionally significant. That sounds very nice in the abstract. Usually it's arisen from need in a particular situation. As a particular department student said, oh, we could do this. And by the time it gets to us, we're saying everybody could do this. And so then it becomes an institutional project. So the examples here are Academic Skills Hub, creating an online research supervisor's course, and evaluating first-year capstones. Now I'm going to end with the capstones because the capstone was an emergency measure during lockdown when UCL, the very first year of lockdown, we all went off in March. What UCL did was they said all first years have to have one piece of assessment, not the 8 or 9 or however many modules they normally do. One single piece of assessment that is very synthetic. So in other words, it was very like the connected curriculum. And it varied according to which department. Some departments did really interesting ones, others were less ambitious. So it was originally just to make life easier for everybody for first years, because it's a low stakes year anyway. But funnily enough, it's become a really interesting experiment. Some of it went so well that they now think about how they could use it in future as an integrated project. So I've gone back to connected curriculum there. But the student fellows, I was involved in the review, and we had student fellows working with us. And we all went through various interviews together and pulled out themes and discussed it and tried to work out. So they co-wrote that report with us. That's a nice example of what a student fellow can do. Questions? Well, we can't see very much. Push you on the screen. 2 monitors.
Yeah.
I can have a question. Was there any volunteer students that participated in the projects, or were all the students paid?
Great question, thank you. They can arise in one of two ways. They always get some payment, but sometimes it's a stipend. It's a sort of £150 for the whole thing, which is not really a wage. But I think the student fellows get a wage. Students can initiate projects at ChangeMakers, but so can staff. So we often do the work of joining them up. So we might help students find a member of staff who could help them with their project, and vice versa. They do have to have both. So some of them come with both, some that we do some of the work with them. This has occasionally gone wrong when it's been a very sensitive issue. So we had one student who wanted to work on decolonising the curriculum. I assume you know what that means, but dealing with racism in the curriculum. And the staff member who was eventually got involved didn't take criticism very well and was quite sensitive about it. And the whole thing got very actually uncomfortable for the students. That's the one example I know of, secondhand, where perhaps the joining up wasn't so good. I don't think it wasn't disastrous, but the project didn't particularly work. So students can come to us, staff can come to us. The idea is that the students have to be willing. We don't fund projects where it's clearly that they want students to do some work and they want to pay them a little bit to do it. If the staff member says, I want my bibliography updated, this is an imaginary example. I want my bibliography updated, so I'll pay some students to go off and collect a list of books and journals that have come out. They won't get money. It has to be an initiative from the students to some extent. They have to be working together. Another one is that people wanted to set up a conference, and I was one of the reviewers of that project, and I just said, it sounds a bit like you want students to do all the hard work so that the department gets their student conference. I think you need to take on more of the long-term work because they won't realise how much work it is. So, you know, there'll be a lot of discussion and pushback and criticism like that, but the students have to be voluntary. They have to be looking forward to it and enjoy it.
Thank you.
So I was just really curious about, you've been doing this for a while now, and we're just starting up in a sense. And the hope is for almost like a cultural transformation, right? Yeah. So students who start to think differently about what they're doing at the university, and teachers who start thinking differently about the roles of students. So what kind of changes do you see?
Well, this is actually a really useful question, because I've just remembered that I promised a question I mentioned. You could say the long-term view is that connected curriculum only work partially, but ChangeMakers has worked better than I think we hoped for. And why is that is an interesting question. And I think one reason is that we were lucky, the administrative and academic team who ended up doing that, they had a contained set of projects that they could focus on rather than a kind of university-wide dizzying setup. But the administrators have been amazing. She's still running it. The academic lead, Jenny Mari, is now there at UCL. But actually, the team that began with an administrative hand, they're really the ones that stitched it together. They spend a lot of time meeting students, supporting students, talking them through, guiding them. There are drop-ins just to explain how the scheme works. So it's a very small team. It's basically 3 people who work not full-time on this. They have other things as well. But they're very focused and dedicated. And I think it could have gone wrong. I mean, I think we owe a lot of credit to those administrative people who arranged all the meetings, who went to all the trouble of making sure the students could attend, followed up on problems. I think that was actually integral to its success. So without that, it wouldn't have made it. But ultimately, it's the students have something to do with a bright idea. I mean, every department has students going, oh, I wish we had this, or I wish this happened. And at UCL, in theory, the response is, well, you can start making it happen. Another temptation is that we have the National Student Survey. This has been much to you. And we saw departments' National Student Survey scores go up 20 degrees, 20 points. And it was all attributed to a ChangeMakers project that had changed the way that, I don't know, that assessment was handled. And then nearby departments, that's when they take notice, because they also need to get their NSS scores up. And they go, well, Department X have gone up 17%, we really need to look at what they did, and they attribute it to the ChangeMakers. So the culture, that's where you get both sides buying in. And some students put in projects that are clearly not going to work. We have to talk them down a bit and try and see what we can actually make happen. But actually, we've discovered that they've got a lot of bright ideas and they're willing to make an effort for it. So it's paid off. But I do think it's very important who they speak to first, how much support they get. It'd be very easy for them not to finish because they're busy with other things. And so there has to be a really good, reliable set of people they know they can trust. So that in itself changes the culture. So I think ChangeMakers would be really successful. We tried at one point pushing it out to departments where the departments had to basically run it, and it didn't really work. So we've gone back to the central team who coordinated it across the place. Some departments have never had a project. Others have had one every year, and it's become a completely normal thing. And what happens is word gradually gets around to the ones that don't use it, and eventually something about it interests them. I'm just answering questions out. You lot can manage the time, and so
There's a question. There's a question in the chat again.
yeah, chat's not very easy up here. The machine's a little unresponsive. Sorry. It's a really interesting thing to keep the intrinsic motivation alive and not squash it with institutional factors. So sometimes students come with, as I say, what we call unrealistic expectations. I'm going to invent one, which is, we don't have any assessments until the end of the year, or we have much less in the way of assessment. We have 10-minute Viva oral exams for every module, and they really believe in it. And that's not a real example, by the way. And then there has to be a really complicated conversation about how the institution cannot actually do that, because there are 300 students on the course. 10 minutes each is a lot. But as I say, it's down to the team. They're always looking for what is the spark here, and can we keep that alive? And the form of it might be very different at the end. But the students' actual willingness to come forward and suggest something is, we cultivate that. So that's the kind of approach that's taken. So I think they would see it as a failure if someone finished a project successfully, but then never wanted anything else to do with that sort of scheme again. It's much more about something that they want to have a sense of belonging and cultivation from. And students who do the scheme always do feel much more part of the university. And very often they say things like, I had no idea it was so complicated. But they say it in a good way, but they realise that the university is not simply a large school that you go to when you leave ordinary school, kids' school. So I think one of the difficulties is it's so different in every context, so it's really hard to give general answers, but on the whole we see a lot more affiliation and good bonds formed with staff. Dear, can I answer it? Matthias has sent up.
Since I'm sitting where the course is so much easier to ask questions.
I don't want to be gossip with chat.
You have a week to do so.
No, I'm a bit curious because the projects you described seem to be sort of some enthusiastic students come with an idea. How many students, how widespread is this? Do all students feel like they're a part of this, or is this a select group?
UCL has, last time I looked, 46,000 students. We're not seeing all of them. I think there are about 80 projects. I think that graph that I showed earlier had a rough number for last year, so 60 to 80 across the university. Now, UCL has 11 faculties, 83 things that we could call departments. Some of them called centres or units, but essentially they're like departments. So the average is out at one per department each year. And one of the problems we've not really cracked is trying to have continuity. So some projects happen one year, they go really well, and they die away because nobody is interested in doing that the following year. And without, the idea is the staff try and cultivate it, but it might be that one year someone's very keen on something, and the next year they're not. Very often it's a problem-solving thing in the long run. They fix something, and then it's not a big deal anymore, so people's interest goes elsewhere.
Yeah, so just to follow up on that, because you said that there were, you could see the general scores in that student survey thing that they changed for the better considerably, and yet very few students are involved. So I'm a bit curious then, is this because the projects are so successful that teaching becomes much better? Or is it that the motivation and feeling of belonging, feeling of, yeah.
I think it's where it makes a big difference. I really wish I'd read up more, because there have been so many, they were a bit blurred. I think that the ideal ChangeMakers project makes a difference to everybody. So again, fictional example, but I'm sure it's come up, a department has all its deadlines at the same time, and that there's a ChangeMakers project that looks at the possibility of staggering the assessment, interviews the staff concerned, sets up the right meetings, sets up the right conversations, and the following year, there's a little bit of gap between the deadlines at least, so there's a few days between them. Now, all the students are pleased about that for 1 year. The following year, it's just what you do. And so it's quite a fickle thing. So a lot of the more spectacular ones are problem solving. The more interesting ones deal with dilemmas, which are not things you solve, but they're things you try. So 1 year, you might want to look at decolonising the curriculum. That's not something that goes away, because there's so much to be done. So that's the opposite. Every year is a fresh start on a huge problem. And so those ones, we really like to see continuity. But of course, the students are busy or they leave. The staff might say, I put a lot of time into that last year, it was great, but I need to focus on my research this year. So continuity is not something we've quite got the hang of yet. So there is a problem with timing. The students or staff apply for some funding. I think there's a window in November and another one in February. It all has to happen by the end of the academic year. So especially the later ones have to be very, very constrained in their ambition in order to be finished off. So we try and build in a kind of, well, if you can't do all of it, this bit will be the important bit to focus on. Stuff. But the good ones affect everybody. But as I say, it passes, then it's forgotten. Any more? Oh, still on text up. Any more, folks? Oh, I can't even scroll properly on this. Spot the Mac user. It's not doing anything, are they? Okay, stop that. Has no one even thought of a really difficult question? Catch up, speak up.
It's very nice here. Haven't you learned that yet?
I do like it here. You have the university is just full of space. The food is nice. The buildings are quite big and calm. It's not like UCL. UCL is extremely busy. Let me say then as a final thought that England is a very strange place to be in at the moment. We've all got used to the fact that Brexit's now happened, but we are in a situation where we really don't know where it's going in higher education. Funding is becoming a mad game in England, but we look to people like you to keep the sanity in higher education for the next few years and remind us when the Tories get out and we have some funding again, what we can do. No, but it's got very, very entrepreneurial, and I think, I think you can go too far with that, and we are facing very difficult situations regarding funding, having had quite a good period, as it were. So it would be really difficult to see what will survive in harsher funding environments, because ChangeMakers costs money. I really hope, and UCL is a very robust institution, I'm hoping that we'll manage to carry on prioritising these and not shrink. But the government is not particularly talking about pouring money into higher education. The very high fees have been frozen, so actually they're losing money all the time and so on. So I think watch with interest. Sometimes what we want to realise is that may suffer from lack of funding and so on, which is a shame. So I'm giving it to you while it's still working.
I can just add that I also think that the students also didn't or do not see the opportunities they have, that they can start project, evaluate project, develop projects. So because they have fundings to do that, but often I see a kind of lack of ideas, inspirations, I don't know, because they're like so stuck to their education, their teachers. So they're like into this Norwegian model that they get told what they need to do, and then they pop up at the university, and then all the ideas are kind of like lost in education. I don't know if you have noticed that, because I find like we have like 4 student organizations in iEarth, and they have lots of money and fundings, but I kind of miss the ideas from the students.
Right. I mean, London is a very unusual place. It's UCL is there's a lot of melting pot going on there. There are people meeting people from, we have students from, I don't know, over 100 different countries and different backgrounds. And I think it is a very good place for building up that entrepreneurial kind of initiative.
Yeah.
London, but particularly UCL. And yeah, I guess if you have a kind of more sedate, less frantic existence, then things don't seem quite as urgent. So I guess that's the flip side of what I was just saying.
Yeah, I think it's just it's definitely a culture change for students as well, to see that they have so many opportunities, and that they can, like, you have the opportunity to start a project, you have the people around you to support you. But I think there's just a very culture change for them. And yeah, so there are some projects started already, but I would like to see even more, because they have the money to do that.
I think there's some momentum that's needed. You needed to know that a few quite interesting, quite dramatic things have been planned, and I think, oh, I could do that. So I guess, yes, you do need that. I think it helped that it was set within the culture of, we're changing the whole curriculum as well, and do you want to join in? That was very much the launch of ChangeMakers. Ironically, ChangeMakers seems to have got more momentum behind it at the moment, and the connected curriculum struggled a little bit. Yes, I think. Thank you for. I will see some of you again. Lovely to have met you, even if rather as a small picture.
But does UCL ChangeMakers have like a big list of projects on its website? Do you know?
I don't think it has a full list. I think it has case studies. I think that's how they focus it. I think the full list of things. There's a difficulty with how long does a student have their name attached to something in public.
Yeah.
You know, these are unanswerable questions. So I think they've got the case studies very much voluntary. Like, we want to put that thing forward. Some people might feel their project didn't work that well, it was okay. That might be fair, it might not, but yeah, I don't think we force them to be public.
I think it would be useful for us to use the ChangeMakers website and the Connect curriculum.
There are
as here are some ideas of things that students have done and been driven out.
I mean, there's quite a lot of publications. There's a student conference now happening at UCL. There's lots out there. You might bump into ChangeMakers people quite a lot. I can ask about happy to check if there's more, closer. There is a publication.
I will come over in September.
Come over.
Make a test of myself.
Yeah.
I will be an hour away. 50 minutes and I go for 7, 8 in the morning.
Well, make sure we call them, because I'm always there.
I know.
So other than